Hello and thanks for watching, and just before we start today's video, it's important that you know that today's recorded footage where I was testing today's SSD was recorded during the beta software update from Sony. Internet out there, everyone can take advantage of M.2 SSD upgrades, but this was recorded a few weeks ago when bench testing a whole pile of SSDs. So it is during the beta, but it still applies. I just wanted to let you guys know before we start today's video. Run the credits. Hello and welcome back, and that's right, we're continuing looking at SSDs on the PS5, testing their performance in loading, textures, draw distance, you name it, frame rate, etc. So, for now, today we are taking advantage of the XPG GAMMIX or GAMMIX S70 from ADATA. We've already moved over a bunch of games, and today we are looking at Terminator Resistance, No Man's Sky, Red Dead Redemption 2, Dead by Daylight, and Hitman 3. All but one are PS5 games or PS5 updates, with Red Dead Redemption 2 being the PS4 game, but of course is absolutely enormous. Look at the size of it, 110 gigabytes. But also this is because the game has horrendously long load times, so it's a great way to compare an older generation game, the PS4, it's crazy to call the PS4 an older generation, see how it runs on this next gen SSD. Throughout this video, we will be comparing against the performance of the same games in the same scenarios running on the PS5's own internal SSD from a previous session. And I should add, as mentioned at the beginning, this is not my first testing of the GAMMIX S70. This is my third video on this SSD, and I do recommend you check out those other two videos just because as we go through these tests, there's going to be things that are referenced. And for example, the benchmark provided by the PS5 is in the first video. Some of the draw distance and low to mid to high texture kind of resolution images as we go through the games. It gives you a good understanding of where frame rate drops and stuff like that goes, and hopefully helps you understand why you should or shouldn't buy any one SSD. So this is part 3. We're starting this off with Hitman 3. We've got two different scenarios here. We're running two different areas of the game. One of them utilises a lot more draw distance than the other, but the other one takes advantage of a huge amount of NPC traffic. So it's going to be interesting to see how they both perform. They both performed very well on the internal SSD, as one might expect. We're not counting the early booting of these games from what you're seeing here on screen, largely because, as you've seen throughout, there is loads of network connectivity on this game. I could disconnect the PlayStation from the internet, but then intermittently the screen is interrupted by urges to connect to the internet for online services, and it just interrupts the flow and does undermine some of the results. Now, we're not going for a direct story mission, we're going for a bespoke mission, largely because it removes a lot of the setup cutscenes. But for now, let's kick off straight away with a Baskerville Barney. 3, 2, 1. Making our way in. I apologise if you pick up the noise and the clicky clack of the controller as I play the game. I'm going to try and limit that, but it's very, very difficult in the kind of proximity that I'm filming within. But for now, we are in the game. We've got all those lovely textures around us. We're just going to sort of loop that camera around. I know we're seeing slightly kind of noisy video images there. I do apologise. A lot of that's coming through on the capture, and when these get compressed into the top of the screen where they're side by side, that certainly makes a difference. What we're doing is we're kind of trying to vaguely repeat the same process on each of these just to see where the differences lie. But for now, what we're trying to do is just get into this main building as quickly as we can. And then from there, what we want to do is kind of open up more textures, more NPCs, and ultimately just get the game to do a lot more. Now, in previous testing, I've exchanged outfits with this guy and then moved him out of cover. I'm not going to bother this time because I don't think that's necessary. So what I'm going to do is simply, because we're not playing this game for long enough to care, I can just go ahead and just steal his outfit just for the hell of it. And then no doubt his body's going to get spotted very, very quickly. But that doesn't matter because we're not playing for a vast amount of time. So let's head in, because I shouldn't really be in this building anyway. But for now, I can make my way through different areas of this map. And then from there, we can just sort of look around and see how much of the game's textures it can load in as we push through all the way through the house here. And again, we can use the infrared camera there, but we're not going to bother. We're just going to move around, just get the game to force in as many textures as possible. We're not seeing any problems, any issues with textures as we get closer and then they're swapped out. You can see textures as and when they are getting swapped throughout, so we're not going to bother with that. But for now, I think this is absolutely fine. And we can make our way onto our next save game for this game. So again, actually let's stick in the game there. This is in another area of the game, the Mendoza area. And this is one where there are a huge number of NPCs. So again, what we're trying to do here is get the game to struggle, get the game to try to, you know, if it goes into some sort of low texture problem, or it starts having T-poses as the AI stuff doesn't load in correctly. But for now, 3, 2, 1. Nice and simple here. We are just going to run around the whole map as much as we can. I'm just going to go ahead straight away at the beginning here and take out this guy. That felt like that loading time was absolutely great. No difficulties whatsoever. I'm not feeling like there's any problems in what we're doing here. But for now, let's go ahead, sort this guy out. Knock him out. Steal his outfit. And just go for a bit of a run around the map. Again, lots of stuff here. If we make our way into the central area of this map, the sheer number of NPCs is just incredible. I mean, again, this game manages to pull more NPCs than any game I've ever seen where you can actually interact with them. This area here is barely the tip of the iceberg, and the game is definitely being forced to introduce NPCs and destroy assets in the background. There was a slight dip in frame rate there, but again, looking at the sheer number of introduced assets here, that's not going to be a huge surprise. And I think it's hard to chastise the SSD for that. Again, we're just going to move in and out of the building here just to see if that has any difference there. Because again, as we're doing this, remember, assets are being having their texture quality lowered when they're not directly in our line of sight or proximity. But for now, I'm quite pleased with that. I would say, oh, the body's just been found, never mind. But for now, I'm going to come out and make our way into our next game, which is Terminator Resistance. Right, so we're making our way into Terminator Resistance here. Once again, we are not counting this game's straight from XMB loading. We're checking this game's loading from loading up the Infiltrator mode on this, where you play as a Terminator. Now, I did touch on this in the other videos, but I'm just going to lightly touch on it here. This is an SSD that arrives with a first-class heatsink pre-attached, but it's actually too large for the PS5's own internal base. So it's worth remembering that by going for this SSD, you are going to be using an SSD without the internal cover on. You'll have the external covers, those white plates of your PS5, but you won't have the metal plate internally, so do bear that in mind. But for now, let's go ahead and load this in 3, 2, 1, go. Oh, once again, we do have to load in like this, sorry. So let's go for it now in 3, 2, 1. Again, going into this, I'm not even sure if this mode was available when the game was launched. It would seem madness if it's not. We're also going to include the opening cutscene here, because it allows us to kind of measure these up side by side. Obviously, this is a pre-rendered FMV, so it's not taking advantage of any kind of asset building now. None of this is in-game. And again, I can skip this, but we're going to leave it in just so we've got something to measure these two against one another, rather than the simple screen there as these assets are being pulled. Just a single video, of course, it's a single file, before we make our way into the game. But again, I think they're running fine. There's no drop in the frame rate that we're seeing there. The game is loading just how I would hope it to work in this scenario. And for now, let's make our way into the game. Nice and simple. Again, we're going to leave the Terminator camera on for a certain period of this, simply because it allows more information to be garnered on screen while we're doing this. Again, we are going to kill these guys where possible, just so we can go ahead and continue moving forward. And all we're going to be doing here is just making our way through the map and just checking out the game's textures as we go. Again, I'll periodically swap between the two camera modes, but for now that still seems absolutely fine. Again, this is a game with a lot of kind of your bare, barren, industrial, apocalypse kind of textures, so it's probably quite easy for a lot of this to be rendered, so we're just pushing the game as much as we can through the areas of the map to try and get the game to work as hard as we need it to see if there's any drops. Again, in frame rates, drops in texture qualities, we get near stuff, anything like that. Move forward. Again, no problems whatsoever. We'll give it another 10, 15, 7, but for now, I think now this is looking fine to me. And I'm quite happy with that. I don't see any problems in the way this game is rendering this. Obviously, the game has that fog that it utilizes. How much of that is in any way hiding textures and assets is negligible, but we'll have to wait and see. But for now, let's make our way into our next game, which is, of course, No Man's Sky. If you've watched my other videos, we are testing the same games on all of these tests for different SSDs so we can keep things fair. No Man's Sky, we're going to load, but we're not going to count the opening load screen here because, again, loads of network connectivity in which incredibly invalidates any test that we're doing there. But for now, let's make our way onto loading up a creator mode. And from there, that's kind of the open sandbox of this game. And again, we're using a completely new save. We're not using existing saves there. And the idea is that while we're doing this, we are starting on a random planet. From that random planet, we're going to fly to the nearest spaceport. And then from the spaceport, fly back down and land on a planet. Again, I've mentioned this in other videos, but I'll mention it again. During the loading screen of this game, when the No Man's Sky logo comes up, there is almost always a drop in frame rate. That has happened with the internal SSD. That has happened on the PS4 Pro. That is just the game struggling to amass all of the information at once with the network connectivity and all of the assets being generated. So don't judge the SSD on the drop in frame rate. Judge this SSD in how it handles the transitions. So for now, let's go in 3, 2, 1. Again, the two playthroughs on the internal SSD and here on the GAMMIX S70, they're not going to be like for like. This is a randomly generated game in creative mode, so the assets are going to be different in a number of key ways, so do stay tuned for that. Also, during hyperspeed, there can be texture kind of hiccups during the rendering. I don't know why my character fell out of the sky there. That has never happened before. That's something to bear in mind. I've never seen my character fall out of the sky during that portion. But as you'll see in a moment, there's every possibility that when we go into the Pulse engine that there'll be texture problems. That is my capture card somewhat struggling to stay on top of the huge amount of stuff happening there on screen. So I believe there in the distance is our space station. So let's go ahead and fly to it. Again, this will differ hugely depending on the game that we're in, so we're not judging this game exclusively like side by side versus the internal SSD. We are looking at how it handles the tasks, not how they compare. Also, again, I know there's lots of kind of video noise there on screen because of the capture card. You can largely ignore that. That's not going to be too problematic here. We can, again, this isn't a loading screen, so we can come out of hyperspeed there and make our way into this space station here. And again, the idea is we land in the space station, we disembark, and then from there we'll make our way into the planet. Probably that one with the rings right there. So we're making our way in. We still have elements of control here. Don't worry, this we're not like being taken into an FMV. This is lots of secret background loading there. So for now, let's step out of the vehicle, and then what we'll do is we'll go up onto the gantry above us. Again, it doesn't really matter which gantry we go into, as long as we go into one of them. So we'll go here. And again, lots of NPCs, lots of activity there. Lots of the lighting stuff. The textures are fine. We're all good. Let's make our way back into the vehicle. And then from there, make our way onto the nearest planet. So we'll go from there and off we go, heading in. And again, you're going to see that kind of noisy graphics there when we go into the Pulse engine. But for now, we're not looking at that. We're looking about how the game is handling these tasks that we're pushing the system into doing. Again, no idea what planet we're going for. We're going to go straight into an automatic landing cycle here. So we're going to be interested to see how the game handles that. I'm also hating that I have forgotten how to use the camera there. I hate the invert, non-invert switch there. It's always problematic. But for now, let's head into the planet surface there just to see how it's going with all of the graphic generation as we head in. Again, if you look around the boundaries, you can see some of the ways the game hides a lot of the textures, using some of those mirrored things there. And then we're going in to the landing area there onto this odd planet with weird flying balls everywhere. Fair play to this game. It is a strange one, but it is incredibly unique. And they've put the hours in. Fair play to them. But let's come out of this game and go into our second to last game, which is, of course, Red Dead Redemption. We're not going to be judging Red Dead Redemption on the loading from the title screen here, because once again, it has title stuff. It has online play, which checks with the social club, which introduces a random element to the comparison, which we're kind of going to avoid. What we're looking at is how quickly the game loads us into the town of Blackwater from my save. Now, bear in mind, this is at the end of the game, and it inherently contains a spoiler. I'm not going to address it, but there's an obvious spoiler. So if you haven't finished this game before, don't watch this, fast forward a few minutes, but don't watch this unless you've finished the game, otherwise I'm going to feel terrible. But for now, let's go in 3, 2, 1. Quite a long loading time here, and again, this is the same area of the map we're going into constantly. In a few of the times I've played this, I have caused trouble in the town by accident, so consequently don't be surprised if all of a sudden I'm just getting shot at. Apologies in advance. But let's see how these two games load. Whenever we've done GTA testing, SSDs like this, the WD Black SN850, Samsung 980 Pro, Firecuda 530, they've all done incredibly well. So I have hopes for this SSD performing just as well in these tests. Let's come out of it there. It is a long old loading time, isn't it? But we are in the single player, and here we are at the edge of the map and in the town of Blackwater. So for now, let's jump on my horse and have a bit of a wander around town, and we'll go into one of the buildings as well. And then from there, just see that the game's not going to have any difficulty. There's no T-poses, no low textures, no graphical inconsistencies, no horse riding men, and some of the early glitches that this game would have suffered once. I'm going to try not riding over people. Again, we're going to head into a building for now. Let's head into one of the ones up here for a change. Let's go ahead and step into this building, whatever it is. I believe it's a barber's. So for there, we can move in. That kind of clever lighting trick to hide some of the texture change, always smartly done. But for now, for me, that's working fine. I'm not seeing any problems there whatsoever. And I think for now, we can start making our way shortly into our next game. And our last game, indeed, which is going to be the PS5 version of Dead by Daylight. Let's head in now. For it there, Dead by Daylight. Come out of the game, and boom, let's head in once again. This game has the most internet network connectivity out there of all the games. This is a game that, you know, it's predominantly played online. We are luckily using an offline play here. We're using it versus bots in some of the training modes. So that should remove any element of kind of outside connectivity undermining our results. But as you're about to see, there is loads of network connectivity. And by network, I of course mean internet. So, again, we're not going to count any of this stuff here because it would make comparing the internal SSD versus the S70 absolutely pointless. But for now, we're into the game here. We're still on the loading screen. This actually makes Red Dead Redemption look like a quick loading game, my God. And which is really weird when you look at this game and you look at the textures. It's nowhere near as impressive as Red Dead. But nonetheless, let's stop ragging on this game. Let's go in. So again, we're going for a nice straightforward survive with the bots here. So let's go in 3, 2, 1. Making our way in now. Nice and straightforward there. And again, we're letting the game do its thing. We're playing as one of the campers here. The loading on this game, once again, it just really surprises me how long it goes. We're not going to be playing this game. We're not going to play with any generators or switches. All we're doing is running around this map. We want to be able to see this map. We want to see what's in it, what's around it. And ultimately, just to make sure that the game's not going to struggle with any textures. But again, we appear to be inside the kind of smelting room or ironworks or whatever the hell it is. And we'll start making our way around the outside of this map just to see if the game encounters any problems while we're doing it. But for now, we're outside. Again, fairly standard stuff. We'll probably bump into some of the other survivors at some point quite easily. But again, I'm not seeing any texture problems. The frame rate is still running tip-top, which is exactly what I want to see here. Again, this is a game more based on scale than it is on direct graphics, but we include it because of that very reason. And there we go. The killer has seen me, so he's coming for me. He's already slashed me one there because I wasn't looking where I was going. But for now, we can go ahead. Are we still being tailed? Yes, we are. But again, I'm seeing no drop in the frame rate there. We've got, characters walking around there on screen. We're doing absolutely fine. And I think for now, we can go ahead and call this a day and go and move these games back onto the PlayStation internal SSD and summarize everything we've seen today. Let's go in and move the games and apps. Lovely and quick. Make sure you're all guys seeing this on screen. We're moving that data over, 261 gig of data. Let's go for it there. So this SSD, once again, unsurprisingly, the S70 absolutely storming it. A lot of the SSDs we've tested over the weeks, we've kind of filtered out the ones that didn't do as well, as they don't make it into the next test in a kind of World Cup style here, but nowhere near as formal. And we do have more direct comparisons coming very, very soon. However, let's look at the facts. The S70 there loaded games, to my mind, although I couldn't see it directly side by side on screen while I'm recording these, it loaded the games. It felt just as fast as the internal SSD. Likewise, as SSDs go, this is probably the most affordable high-end drive out there at the moment, with a lot of its performance benchmarks, particularly in write, but also in read, higher than that of the likes of the WD Black, the Samsung 980 Pro, and SSDs like that. Also combined with its own onboard heatsink, it is both its best and potentially its most off-putting point, the fact that that internal SSD is too large for the PS5 expansion bay, and therefore you have to leave that tiny little metal plate off. But for me, I think it's worth it to overlook it for a great unique heatsink on a drive that's got some serious benchmarks behind it to keep things going. Thank you so much for watching. If you have enjoyed this, do click like or click subscribe as we go through more SSDs and more games in the run-up to find out about what are the best SSDs for PS5 as soon as this expansion port is out of beta and in full release. All of the SSDs that I've talked about, as well as the heat sinks that I've referred to as well, are linked in the description, along with articles over on NAS Compares, where we go into more detail about the right SSDs for the best reasons, and indeed sometimes for the most spurious reasons. We do highlight that to get for your PS5 storage upgrade. But thank you so much for watching. I know these videos can get repetitive, but this is the only way that we can keep things fair across all the SSDs. And thank you so much for staying with me on these. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.